Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. We have a very special announcement for you today. We have a brand new sponsor, and I want to tell you why I've finally decided to get behind a cannabis /CBD /hemp company. So obviously for the last 5 years or so, the entire world has been jumping on the bandwagon of cannabis and hemp. And I didn't exploit the opportunity, we'll say, and jump into the cannabis industry. One, to be honest, I've never been a user of cannabis. I've never really known enough about it. I never really enjoyed the consumption of it and never saw benefit. And to be honest, I did a lot of research. I was actually the chief science officer of a cannabis company for quite a long time, even though I didn't use it. And I was a chief science officer because I wanted to learn about it. And what I did learn was it's effectively, still is effectively, the Wild West. There's very little regulation, much less than you think, particularly in the way that these things are processed. You can have full spectrum cannabinoids derived from cannabis, which have trace amounts of THC. You can have CBD, CBN, and all these cannabinoids derived from hemp, which is a very different thing. And then how they're extracted is also another area of variance in each of these companies. And it was very interesting for me to explore and research and learn and get to interact with literally tens of companies now, maybe 20 or 30 different companies, and learn their processes and learn their extraction processes and learn their sourcing. Where are they actually getting these cannabis products? Where are they actually getting these hemp plants from? Were they well grown? Were they organically grown? Or were they loaded with pesticides like most of the crops around America these days? And finally, after a number of years, I found a company that I believe is putting out some of the highest quality products in the entire CBD space. The company that is now sponsoring the podcast is called NED. You guys may have heard of NED before, NED. I've actually heard of NED probably for the last 3 or 4 years. I've tried their products way back in probably 2018 now. And I did enjoy them, but I was still in the process of doing a significant amount of research. I didn't want to just dive right in and say, yeah, I love this product. And even though I love the branding and I love the mission behind the company, I love why the company was started, which I'll tell you about in due time. But what I most recently have discovered is their best practices behind sourcing and processing their 100% organic hemp is nothing short of industry standard. So without more rambling from me, I wanted to just give you a little bit of an introduction into why NED is now an official sponsor of the Muscle Intelligence Podcast, because I do believe in their products. And I've gone through my due diligence of reading as much as I can, not just about NED, but as I say, 20 or 30 companies in the industry, actually probably more, which I realize is there's actually not that many producers in the country. There's a lot, obviously, but it's not that many that are the main production sources for most of the, whether hemp derived or cannabis derived CBD, CBN, and full spectrum cannabinoids. So without further ado from me, I introduced NED. You guys can check out NED if you go over to Hello NED, HELLONED.com/muscle to get hooked up with 15% off. They've got an entire suite of highly vetted products, high quality products. And as I say, the very least I can tell you is that these are the highest quality products I've been able to find. So if you're someone who does enjoy CBD products derived from hemp, which means they're in the absence of THC, so no psychoactive effects whatsoever, just the benefits of ultimately decreasing inflammation, potentially improving sleep for some people. If you're someone who does love CBD and you love the benefits of CBD, this is a company that I highly suggest you check out. Head over to helloned.com, use the code MUSCLE at checkout to get hooked up with 15% off. Today's podcast is an amazing interview with Mark Sisson. Mark, if you don't know him, might be the fittest man on the planet as far as his age category. If you want to be anyone, it's probably Mark Sisson. He's 68 years old and shredded, certainly single-digit body fat, has an amazing balanced perspective. He's not obsessed. He's not neurotic. He's just very objective. He's very focused. He's very directed. I absolutely love Mark's energy. He's been teaching in this space for 35 years. Mark is the original creator of the Primal Blueprint brand, the Primal Kitchen brand. Mark is a a world-renowned expert in the area of health and fitness and longevity. And he joins me today to give me his insights into ultimately how he looks like he's 25 and 68 years old, still performing in every aspect of life at the highest level. He said he's playing this week ultimate with people in their 20s and ultimately crushing them at 68 years old. There's a lot to be learned here. And I really loved my conversation with Mark Sisson. Don't forget to check out our sponsors, Ned, helloned.com/muscle, after you listen to this incredible podcast with Mark Sisson. Enjoy the show. Mr. Mark Sisson, welcome to the Muscle Intelligence Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben.
Man, I've been a fan for a long time. We did get a chance to meet at PaleoFX a few years back. I wouldn't expect you to meet or expect you to remember, but I've been a big fan of your work for a long time. And like I said, you're like Benjamin Button. You're aging in reverse.
Oh,
so I'm gonna dig into that today, truthfully, because I'm
a
lot of things right, and I think a lot of people in this world have certain concepts of longevity, and I think you're one of the people who's actually putting it to the test. So, one, thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do, and I look forward to digging into your brain.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So you're 69 right now, or 68?
Yes, I'll be 68. I'll be 69 in July. Who's counting, right? So. Yeah,
and you're still walking around with a full 8-pack and still playing ultimate frisbee, and still you're not still running, which is good. But you're still training consistently, and I think all of our audience would be incredibly grateful to start digging into how this all began for you. I know you were an endurance athlete, a marathoner, and triathlete for a long time.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I really was kind of a geeky kid, nerdy, geeky, bookish, interested in reading about longevity for some bizarre reason. I think my mother was into longevity in the early 60s, right? So I started digging into Adele Davis, who was the premier author of the health movement in those days. I lived 2 miles from school, so I jogged to and from school just to beat the bus, right? I could get home before the bus could get home. So I wound up jogging at 11, 12, 13 years old. And lo and behold, became a runner. I was too small to be on the football, the basketball, the baseball team, the hockey team, because I grew up in Maine, and wound up going out for track and then finding that I was actually pretty fit from all of the training that I've been doing unknowingly, and typically would win the mile and the 2 mile. And oddly enough, sometimes the pole vault in the track meets. So that became track and field became my thing. And then sort of because I was doing all this reading about health, I read Ken Cooper's book on aerobics, which suggested that the more running you did, the better it was for your heart and the longer you would live. So that made sense to me. So I ran even more. And then went to college and it was track and cross country, and then started doing road races in the summer. Those morphed into 10Ks and marathons. And by the end of my collegiate career, I was fit enough to start thinking about training for the Olympic trials and the marathon. So I spent a couple of years doing 100 miles a week of training, pretty intense training. Finished 5th in the U.S. National Marathon Championship in 1980, qualified for the Olympic trials. But all of the work that I've been doing, more than it was antithetical to health. So here I'd started on this track to be living longer and being healthier and more productive and more fit. And I was sick all the time, and I had arthritis in my hips and tendonitis and irritable bowel syndrome and upper respiratory tract infections a few times a year. I was a wreck. So it was like the exact opposite of what I've been looking for. So I had to quit running because of the itises, because of the tendonitis and the arthritis. But I was still good enough runner that I could run. So I could ride a bike and I could swim. So I started doing triathlons for a while. So I did Ironman. Actually, Ironman Hawaii was my first triathlon ever. And spent a couple of years doing triathlons, finished 4th at Ironman in 82. And then that was sort of the end of it. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm overtraining. I'm not healthy. My injuries didn't get any better, certainly from training for triathlons. In fact, they were getting worse. So I retired from competition and really just sat back and said, look, I'm going to dedicate myself to being the healthy, fit lean individual that I always wanted to be, and see if I could do it without all of this pain and suffering and sacrifice and discipline and all of the crap that goes along with it. And that began, a 35, 40-year journey looking into how the body responds to certain inputs like food, like sleep, like different types of exercise, what genes get turned on or off by these inputs, and how maybe we can control them, not just as athletes, but just as regular individuals going about life, wanting to optimize health and maximize the experience of life. And so that's kind of how we get to where I am today. I've achieved over the past 40 years a level of health that is far greater than when I was in my 20s and I was at the peak of my performance career. Right, so my energy levels are great. I feel great. I try to spend as much time as I can playing as opposed to managing pain or discomfort, which is what I did as an endurance athlete, and trying to enjoy the process of living, whether it's enjoying eating, enjoying working out, enjoying playing, enjoying being with family or friends, and trying to put a lifestyle together that became the tagline for our company, which is basically live awesome.
You've been in this longevity game for what sounds like 50 years. And I'm curious how you've seen the transitions, and I'm curious how the definition or maybe the focus has changed from, say, the late 60s when you started, on this journey for longevity, maybe through the 70s and 80s, and what the really focus was way back then.
Well, the focus in those days was don't die before you're 70. I mean, it's literally was a weird concept as the average lifespan of Americans has increased over the years. In the 50s and 60s, it wasn't much beyond 70 years. I mean, literally, Social Security was the whole reason that Social Security worked, where some workers would contribute to a pot to pay off the retired workers, was the assumption that you retire at the age of 65 and then die at the age of 67. So they only have to pay you for 3 or 4 years. So the original concept of longevity wasn't like, oh, how do I live to 100? It was really, how do I extend my life into my 80s and do so with a good quality of life. Now, I've always defined quality of life as really two major categories. One is mobility, like how can I move through this world? Can I travel? Can I walk every day? Can I do things? Can I interact with people and go places and not be confined to a wheelchair or a bed or my house or my sofa? So the mobility part of that is a pretty significant aspect of enjoying a quality of life. And then, of course, access to memory. So how can I avoid dementia or Alzheimer's through whatever the dietary interventions that I might engage in, but also using my brain in ways that would, keep it worked out the same way I would work out a muscle in the gym. Those two are the main sort of focus of my longevity program. I'm very fascinated by the biohacking movement right now, and this concept that people say, well, I want to live to be 160 and I want to live to be 170. And I'm like, dude, if I hit 90 and I'm still, functioning on all cylinders, I will be very happy with that. I mean, I'd like 100, maybe, sure, who knows? But I'm not looking for these super long, extended lifespan things, because I feel like humans, we do have a fuse, and it does, the candle does burn out at some point, and that's the circle of life. So as long as we can optimize the time that we have here and, enjoy every possible moment, savor every moment, extract the greatest amount of pleasure out of every moment that we can, that's what I'm after. That's kind of my focus in all of this. Not like, oh, if I do everything right today, if I withhold calories today, if I don't do this today, if I don't have this dessert today, then maybe I'll add 3 months to my life on the back end. I don't think in those terms. I think about today.
Well, it sounds like you're living without regrets. And I think that the challenge with those people who want to live to 160, many of them, at least the ones that I've engaged with, do have some regrets of their past, where they think they're not living life to the fullest. And as you say, they aren't maybe expressing the joy, the love, the play that they should be every day to really enjoy the day to the fullest. Talk to me a little bit about your daily routine. So I've seen many of the YouTube videos. I know what it is, but I think the audience would be really, really enlightened to start to hear like what a gentleman of your caliber is doing on a day-to-day basis.
So I'm recently retired, although I don't like that word. I actually tried to be retired for 2 years. It didn't work. So I started another company. Well, we can talk about that. But I have to be doing something. I have to be, mentally involved in some productive task, some reason to get up every day, not just to go hit the gym. So I get up around, I don't know, between 7 and 7:30. I try to get 8.5 hours of sleep every night. Have a cup of coffee. I read 2 actual newspapers, not little stuff like this, but actual big ass newspapers.
You still make those things, or are they from the 80s?
No, they're from the 80s and they still make them. I do, and then I do the crosswords, and I do a lot of the puzzles in the papers. Although I'm very fast at those, so it's most days it's 15
You're not
minutes.
Intentionally to keep your brain sharp, because you enjoy it.
Both. Yeah. I really do enjoy it, and it's become a pattern of mine. And just the side effect is I'm sure that I'm keeping my brain sharp doing that. So it wasn't intentional to do again, it's not like I'm sacrificing fun working on this goddamn puzzle. So my brain will be better in 20 years. It's literally, I enjoy it. It's part of my routine. Then I do a little bit of work, answer emails, write something, because I'm always writing, either a column or an idea for something. And then I break around 10 or 10:30 and do my workout. I'm always fasted for the workout. I'm a big fan of doing every workout fasted in that regard. Today I did a leg day just because I didn't have anything else. I have a very fractal workout schedule. So I try not to really work out as much as I try to find things to do. But the reason I was in the gym today was because yesterday the weather was right, and I went for a 1.5-hour fat bike ride on the sand. So that's one of my favorite workouts here. So you ride a 4.5-inch wide tire bike on the sand, on the soft sand and the hard packed sand. It's an incredible workout. It's very safe. I mean, you can't get hurt doing it. And it's out in the fresh air. You're breathing the ionized, ozonated water coming off the ocean. It's fantastic. So I did that yesterday. The day before, it just happened to be low tide, and low tide in front of my house here. It's perfect for sprinting. So I'm like, okay, I had some other plans today, but I got to take advantage of the sprinting day. So I went down and joined a couple of my lifeguard buddies for a sprint session on the sand. The day before that, I lifted weights. The day before that, I did an 1.5 paddle. So I try to mix it up every day. And that's, I think, one of the things I realized very recently about my program and how my body type has been shaped over the last 20 years is this combination of a cross-training type workout that really works well for my body type. I was a marathoner. I'm basically an ectomorph, although kind of ecto-meso. My normal weight when I raced was 142 as a marathoner, and I was a big marathoner at 5'10". And then it was I raced triathlons at 152 to 155. I weigh 172 now, and I have probably the same body fat. But because I don't do any sort of running that chews up muscle tissue, because I mix and match like a day of stand-up paddling, and then another day of lifting, and then a day of sprinting, and then a day of focused leg work on the bike, and then a leg day in the gym. I'm kind of all over the place. And then I might play ultimate frisbee, where I'm doing what amounts to 2 hours of shuttle runs with 20-somethings. All of it kind of combines to keep my body a little bit like ready for anything, any type of activity. I can swim. I can do a lot of stuff. Whereas if I was just in the gym every day, just lifting weights and stretching afterwards, that would not be enough for me. That would sort of push me into a different category of fitness. If I were just running, I could probably be one of the top age group runners in the country based on my history. It's not interesting to me, and I don't want to lose my muscle mass for that. I enjoy paddling. I enjoy riding. So, I want to be it's like my little mini decathlon, if you will, of all these different events that I can put together, none of which is done enough to cause like overuse injuries, because it's always mixing it up. Does that make sense?
Makes absolute sense. And there's a lot of brilliance in that should be just kind of noted for the audience listening. Is the diversity is great, not only for your body and allowing each part of your body to recover, but also for your brain to allow different areas of your brain to be stimulated in different ways. And I think people who are younger, aspiring to be at your level at 68 years old, should realize that the requirement or the necessity behind skill acquisition, right? Intentionally trying to diversify your skills, because like you're playing all these different things. And if the average person tried to paddle for an hour and a half, they couldn't do it. If they tried to sprint for an hour or however long, they probably couldn't do it. And you've just maybe been intentional or not over the last 30 years developing these skills. And now it gives you more diversity, because what I find is a lot of people get really good at what they're good at and don't ever try anything else. And that becomes very limiting, because if you hurt one thing, you get a little injury, all of a sudden you're kind of in trouble.
No, I've got friends who are very fit at what they do, and who will come out and ride with me. And sorry, they can't hang. And these are people that are 15, 20 years younger than me. And when I paddle, I paddle alone because nobody can hang with me. And I don't want to sound like a dick.
Call me on, Mark.
I'm out there for my workout. I'm not out there to be, looking at dolphins. I mean, I am looking at dolphins and manatees, but on my way to doing my workout. So,
yeah. That's awesome. So looking back on, let's say, the last 30 years of your longevity journey, if you had done anything differently, what would it be?
The last 30 years.
Or you pick a time frame.
Well, but I mean, because I could go back 40 years and I could say, well, if I knew then what I know now about training, about diet, about nutrition, I was an elite marathoner. If I'd known, I would have done things differently. Or triathlon. If I had taught myself how to swim, I would have been one of the best triathletes in the world. But I wasn't willing to spend the time to do that. So I can go back and say, well, if I'd spent the time, I would have been one of the best in the world. But I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have learned the lessons that I've learned. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is there is only feedback. There's no failure. And going back and saying I would do something different doesn't necessarily mean that it would have left you in a better place. I am who I am today because of the mistakes I made, more than because of the successes that I had. And over time, as you do get older, you are allowed to become successful by having accumulated. At some point, you just can't be an accumulation of failures your whole life, right? You got at some point pull it together and be successful. But as you get older, some of the lessons that you learned now really come home to roost, and you're able to incorporate them and then move forward. But all of those things that I keep, every once in a while, I would say, geez, if I'd only done this, I could have run 3 minutes faster in the marathon, or I could have won Ironman. Okay, but I'm pretty happy with where I am today.
Right. And how about with respect to longevity practices, day-to-day practices? Is there any kind of glaring things you did along the way where you're like, God, I wish I wouldn't have done that? Outside of the extreme amounts of endurance racing, I'm sure you'd be like, that might not have contributed to longevity. But still a great benefit.
Yeah, no, I feel like the body is so resilient that the path that I've taken over the past 20 years has corrected many of the things that would have literally killed me if I kept doing them. I mean, I had irritable bowel syndrome horribly until from the age of 14 to 47. It wasn't until I was 47 that I really understood what I was doing that was causing this IBS that ran my life, that literally ran and ruined my life. And once I figured it out and I started on this path to healing and recovery, everything was like, oh my God, this is like, how did I go as long as I did, suffering that much? And even on a daily basis, one of my little gratitude exercises almost on a daily basis is remembering back to how bad things were and appreciating what I've done for myself in making those shifts and healing. So I had osteoarthritis in my 20s, which had I kept on that path, I would probably have, joint replacements now, maybe an ankle replacement, maybe a knee replacement, maybe a hip replacement. But I corrected, and I got to the point where not only did I not need those, some of those joints are the strongest parts of my body now. They're certainly stronger than they were in those days. So the resiliency of the body is incredible, and probably my strongest message that I have for anybody who is watching this, who's read my books, is it's never too late to start to incorporate some of these changes, whether it's a dietary change, whether it's getting the right amount of sleep, whether it's mobility exercises, whatever it is. It's really never too late to reverse what would otherwise be a slippery slope downhill toward decrepit, old, infirm, immobile, which is, unfortunately, what a large part of the population is facing right now.
Yeah. So what are some of the high impact habits that you implemented at that 47th year to really make a shift in the ultimately the stress levels?
So I'd already done years of writing about health and diet, and I'd already recognized how bad sugar was. So I'd kind of cut sugar out. I'd already recognized about the inflammatory nature of industrial seed oils. I'd cut some of those out. But what I hadn't addressed was my particular susceptibility to issues from grain. So when I cut grain out of my diet, gluten, in particular wheat, it was transformative. It really was like such a light switching on for me that it prompted me to start to think, wow, if I've been assuming that grains are good and that I've been, as an endurance athlete, I've been chowing down on 1,000 grams of carbs a day for 30 years, thinking I got a carb load, between every day for the next workout the next day, and that grains are the cheapest, best, most effective source of carbs. Therefore, grains have to be good for me. If I had the fact that I was unwilling to look at what grains might be doing to me suggested to me that there might be tens of millions of people like me who just assume, grains, it's the base of the food pyramid. It's like the government has been promoting it for all these years. Why would you think?
The government always has your best interest at heart.
Of course. So just that one little shift caused about an 85 to 90% reversal. And then the next shift came from incorporating, in my case, collagen supplementation. I started doing collagen peptides, and I started doing it for my Achilles, but I noticed that my gut was healing even more. Like that last 10% of my gut that needed to heal was responding well to collagen. That put me on a whole investigation toward looking at collagen as maybe the fourth macronutrient. We have fats, proteins, carbohydrate, and of the proteins, most people think of protein as muscle building, but the largest source of protein in the human body is collagen. It's skin, hair, and nails. It's part of bones. It's connective tissue. So it's fascia. It's ligaments. It's tendons. It's cartilage. It's all of this stuff that isn't muscle that needs collagen peptides to rebuild, the raw material to rebuild this. And if we don't consume it in our diet, we tend to lose the stiffness, and we tend to they become this soft tissue starts to diminish in efficiency and effectiveness. And I noted that in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s, we were still doing stews and broths, and bone broths, and the grandmother would make a pressure cooker stew or something like that. We, as kids, we would eat Jell-O, and Jell-O was a source of collagen peptides, of gelatin. Even my mother and most women in those days ate Knox gelatin. They literally had these packets of Knox gelatin that they would stir up, and it would be for their nails, to help their nails. Well, as we get to the 80s and 90s, the health Nazis start coming on and saying, Jello's bad for you and you can't have Jello. So Jello suffered a huge hit in terms of sales. So kids were no longer eating Jello. Everybody was eating the choice cuts of the meat, the New York steak or the prime or the whatever, but they weren't eating the nose to tail parts of the animal. Bone broths was ceased to be a thing. So nobody was even eating bone broth. So we had like a 20-year period there where nobody was really getting any collagen in their diets. And I started to think about all the athletic injuries that I would see, the ACL tears and the torn rotator cuffs and the twisted ankles that shouldn't have ever been that susceptible to a twist on the football field or on the basketball court. I started to think, like here's a nutrient that's been missing from the American diet for 20 years, and it's causing problems. It's literally causing problems. So that was sort of an interesting little, aha moment that I had that started with my own issues, and then I started to look at, well, what's going on with the rest of the world, and then I became fascinated with the idea of collagen as a supplement.
Talk to me, Mark, about the challenges or the issues with gluten and grains. So gluten seems to have its own set of challenges, but grains in general, there's always arguments, right? There's people saying you need grains and legumes for your microbiome. Those are really important to establish a diverse microbiome. And then I get your argument that says, hey, you know what? These things aren't doing us any good. If you had to argue both sides of that, how would you approach that?
Okay, so both sides. On the one side, I would say some people do okay with grains. Wheat in Europe, for instance, is far different from wheat in the United States. It's wheat in the United States is grown specifically for its gluten content, for its gluten is protein. It's the plant storage form of protein. Typically, it's so tightly wound in these grains, in these seeds, that the human body has not had enough time in terms of evolution to adapt to the easily digesting of these glutinous proteins. So with some people, it's horrible. If you have celiac, you can die from eating grains. Other people, like myself, I can eat corn as a grain, ground up corn. I can have, there's a few other types of grains that I can have. Wheat is an issue for me, but I can have a couple of bites of bread, and it's not, I've repaired my gut enough that I can reintroduce, as long as there's a lot of butter on the bread, I can have a couple of bites of bread. Other people, zero issue. Grains are the basis of their diet. They have cereal for breakfast. They have a sandwich for lunch. They have pasta for dinner. Now, another argument there would be that grains are just a cheap source of calories that convert to glucose pretty quickly. So you would say, well, if you're trying to eat a low carb, low glucose diet, then we won't even worry about the proteins in grains. We'll just talk about the fact that they kind of convert to sugar so quickly in your bloodstream that they probably they're not real good nutrition. The other side of that argument would be, you say, well, don't we need grains to feed the microbiome? No, we don't. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people on the carnivore diet right now who are experiencing their best bowel habits ever because of eliminating grains and eliminating vegetables. And you would ask yourself, well, how can that possibly be? Don't we need to use bran and fiber to scour, the intestines and clean it out? And don't we need these soluble fibers so that the part of the microbiome, the bacteria living in your colon, can create short chain fatty acids to feed the lining of the cells lining the gut? And that is one avenue that we could pursue, but it's not a requirement. So the microbiome changes with the diet over time. So whatever microbiome you have today, if you change your diet significantly and kept to that changed diet, your microbiome would be very noticeably different in, say, 3 months or 4 months or 6 months. So what we see is that fecal matter doesn't have to be like undigested food and remnants of bran and fiber and some amount of bacterial turnover. Fecal matter, the reason we have fecal matter is generally to get rid of dead bacteria that have outlived themselves in this microbiome, the 60 to 100 trillion bacteria that live in our gut. They don't live long. They live, a couple of hours, a couple of days at most. So fecal matter ought to largely be just this bacterial turnover and not so much undigested food particles. A lot of vegans would say, well, good bowel habits mean taking a dump after every meal. I'm like, what? I mean, that's the thought process that a lot of vegans have promoted over the years. Well, that's indicative of horrible bowel habits, and undigested food means you're not even absorbing the micronutrients in the paltry amounts of food that you're taking in as a vegan. So the idea that we need fiber, that we need grains in particular to produce or provide fiber as a substrate for the microbiome is a misnomer. It's just yes, if you're going to eat a lot of fiber, then your microbiome will adapt to that, will produce short chain fatty acids. But collagen, having mentioned collagen earlier, collagen is a great substrate for those bacteria to convert to butyrate to short chain fatty acids.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So we've heard of MCT doing that. I've never heard of collagen doing that.
Yep. I mean, there's a lot of things that those bacteria can do. Look, there are 3,000, 4,000 species of bacteria in your gut, and it's always changing, and they become specialists at certain types of things. So if you shift your diet dramatically from one way of eating to another, the microbiome, which may be caught off guard initially for a couple of days, which in some people causes gastric upset, diarrhea, whatever you've heard about radical changes to a way of eating. Over time, if it's a healthful way of eating, the microbiome adapts to that. Those bacteria that are good at extracting, the MCT, the short chain fatty acids from the collagen or collagen peptides, they kind of take over and they do their thing, and a new form of balance is arrived at.
So you've got many YouTube videos on what your typical daily routine is as far as nutrition. You say you fast till about midday and eat proteins and vegetables. Then you have a good, healthy dinner, which is ultimately proteins and vegetables again. I don't want to get into that. I'll link to that in the show notes. What I do want to get into is your supplement regime, if you do have one, and what that approximately looks like. And if you place value on the kind of most up-to-date, longevity protocols like NMN and resveratrol, and obviously fasting is something you're doing consistently.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting too, because I've been in the supplement business for 40 years. I make supplements. I was putting resveratrol in products 35 years ago. I was putting N-acetylcysteine in. I was putting grapeseed extract, green tea extract, ECG. I was putting in phosphatidylserine. I've been a big fan of some of these things over the years. And yet, I'm now coming back to sort of what I would call the minimum effective dose of anything. And I feel like a lot of the early RDAs for these vitamins and minerals were arrived at through autopsies and looking at a cross section of the average person in the 40s, and then coming up with a range of values that somehow represented that range didn't necessarily represent good health. It just represented what the average range was of people that looked otherwise healthy. So it was always sort of assumed that it was arrived at kind of in a weird way. the RDA for vitamin C, for instance, is, DV, was 60 milligrams. And yet there was a time when I was taking 25,000 grams of 25,000 milligrams. But yeah, 25 grams. Yeah, 25,000 grams. 25 grams a day of calcium ascorbate, because Linus Pauling said that was a good idea. And the more vitamin C you had, the better it was for your immune system. Well, it was clearly a horrible idea. But I was willing to take that on. I used to be, resveratrol, is a great example of something that was in the news 20 years ago. Companies have been formed based just on extracting resveratrol and seeing it as the be all and the end all for, telomere length and a number of other anti-aging properties. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing it anymore. I think a lot of the early promise of these esoteric supplements has kind of diminished, and you're not really seeing the sorts of long-term benefits that by now, 20 years in or 30 years in, we might have seen from that. And so, to answer your question, I don't do much in the way of supplementation right now. I do collagen because I think collagen is enough of a fourth macronutrient that I want to get 20 grams a day of it, for instance. I had my 23andMe, DNA test done. It turns out I'm not a very good converter of vitamin D, so I supplement with vitamin D, and it shows up in my blood work, and it shows up in how easily I've handled COVID the 2 times I've had it, which is basically nothing. And that's pretty much it. I don't really supplement anymore. I'm thinking that back to those early RDA investigations, they were also based on a high amount of grain intake in the average human. And if you look at what grains can do, first of all, they raise blood sugar. Second of all, grains contain a lot of phytic acid, phytates, which bind with minerals. And so the daily value for mineral might be as high as it is simply based on the fact that we were chelating so many of these minerals out of our body with the diet that we were taking in. So if you get rid of some of these more offending parts of the diet, in this case grains, for example, maybe your mineral requirements are much less, because minerals tend to want to stay in the body. They don't want to be excreted. So you don't need to take in 1,500 milligrams of calcium every day if you're a woman, unless you're leaching it out, unless you're excreting it out. So I've become much more interested in looking at the body as a closed loop. Like the body wants to hang on to everything. It wants to hang on to its fat, unfortunately. Doesn't want to let go of fat. Wants to hang on to protein. And when one of the things we talk about when we go keto and when we intermittently fast, once you become keto-adapted and fat-adapted, and you then don't eat for 2 days, you would say, well, what happens? Aren't you going to lose your muscle? Well, no, you won't, because there's a great upregulation of protein-sparing systems within the body. And so, whereas you might have, when you were eating 3 times a day, deaminated and pissed out a lot of amino acids, now you retain them in this amino acid sink that we have. So the body wants to hang on to that. It wants to hang on to the minerals. It does not want to really excrete them unless you're overly sweating and drinking too much water, which is another interesting issue there. It wants to hang on to minerals, and I suspect it wants to hang on to vitamins as much as it can. So I like to look at, again, this minimum. What's the minimum effective dose? What's the minimum effective dose of exercise we need to do to be fit and strong and lean and healthy? And there's a bell curve with exercise. At 0 exercise is horrible, and then you find a really optimal point, but then you do more and more and more, and it tails off. Food. I like to tell people, look, most of your life, you've kind of gone with this thought process, like, what's the most amount of this meal I can eat and not feel like a glutton or not feel like shit afterwards? What's the most amount of food I can eat and not gain weight? What's the most amount of dessert that I can have and not be uncomfortable? And that's kind of how we're wired. So that's fine. But we have access to food 24/7. So that gets in the way. So my thought process is, what's the least amount of food I can eat and maintain muscle mass or build muscle mass, maintain energy, never get sick, and not be hungry? So what's the least amount of food I can do? And again, the hunger thing is important. So I'm not suggesting that you have to starve yourself. I'm saying part of the qualification is what's the least amount of food I can eat and accomplish all these tasks, including not be hungry. And you'll find that when you become metabolically flexible, when you learn how to burn fat and you learn how to efficiently use ketones in the absence of glucose, you realize, Jesus, I don't need that much food, really. Certainly, I don't need it meal to meal and not even day to day. So maybe if I make it up over a period of a week, in other words, if I'm shooting for 2,300 calories a day, I don't have to do 2,300 calories every day. I can do 0 calories one day, 0 the next, 4,000 on the third day, 1,800. And as long as at the end of the week, it sort of averaged out to 2,300, if that was my number, then everything stays the same. And my body knew exactly what to do in the presence of food and in the absence of food, because I was metabolically flexible and I knew how to access stored body fat and burn that in the absence of calories. And I knew how to raise body temperature in the presence of too many calories.
Yeah. I think the conversation around people becoming acquainted with their hunger signals and understanding their hunger signals is like a rabbit hole in and of itself. But I'd like to have you talk about, I know, so I'm going to guess, you brought up the magic word, you brought up the word ketones. I want to go down that path. I'm going to guess with the way you eat, with a fair degree of fasting, with protein and vegetables only, and with protein and vegetables only primarily for dinner, I'm going to guess you're just by default often in a ketogenic state. I'm guessing you don't intentionally measure. You can correct me if you do. And I'd just love to have you talk about the benefits you've received and whether or not you think it sounds like it is generally a good idea for most people.
So I don't measure. I'm the anti-quantified self. The only metric I use is how do I feel? And so if whatever I'm doing is making me feel good, whether it's how I choose to eat, when I eat, as long as I feel good, as long as I have energy, as long as I'm getting through my workouts, as long as I'm building muscle, as long as I'm having fun. I don't want to know what my ketones are in millimolar or what my blood glucose is. Yeah, there was a time when I would have wanted to know in the event that I was on a path to ill health. I mean, that's what a CGM is for. Continuous glucose monitor is only good for about a week or two. And then you've gotten all the information you're going to get. Now you're either going to, embody the information and what you know you need to do, or you're going to choose not to, in which case, why did you need that in the first place? But at the end of the day, all that matters is how you feel, right? So when I talk about metabolic flexibility, one of the things I talk about is I'm probably not generating a lot of ketones, but here's why. As somebody who's metabolically flexible, if I go 18 or 20 hours without eating, my liver is producing ketones just at a nice, easy pace, just enough to feed my brain, which would otherwise be expecting glucose, but I've trained it not to expect glucose every 2 hours. One of the interesting things about ketogenic diets and ketosis, so the term ketosis, osis means sort of connotes a pathology, right? Osis means too many ketones. There's too many ketones in the bloodstream. Now, we know that that's not a dangerous thing for people who are not diabetic, for instance. And so when you say, you brag about how high the ketones are in your bloodstream, well, that's fine. You're making ketones, but you're not burning them efficiently. So your body is overproducing them, and then you're pissing them out, or you're sweating them out, or you're breathing them out. So eventually, when you become keto-adapted, and by the way, muscles that are well-trained and fat-adapted don't even use ketones. They're just like, nah, we don't need ketones. You save that for the brain. The brain will use ketones. And the brain basically has no wild swings in energy demands throughout the day. So the brain, like if you go to the gym and you do a heavy leg day, your legs are using 50 times, maybe 100 times the energy requirements for each of those reps that you're doing while you're doing them. and there's a payback over time, and the buildup of lactic acid and a recycling of ATP and all the stuff that happens. But while you're doing that, the brain is just going along in a steady state. The brain is not having a wild energy swing at all. So if you know that you can fuel the brain with just ketones, and you know that the brain on an average day, might use 500, 550 calories throughout the day. That's only 20 calories an hour. There's 7 calories per gram of ketones. That's 3 grams of ketones per hour. The liver's like, we got this, dude. This is nothing. And so the liver isn't going frantically. Oh Jesus! Oh my God! What are we gonna do? We got to crank out 6 millimolar here. We gotta fix things. What happens is that those are short-term adaptations that happen if you start starving yourself for 2 days at a time and you haven't been keto-adapted, or if you're new to keto and your body hasn't really built the metabolic machinery to use the ketones efficiently. That's what happens. But people who have been keto for 10 years will tell you they don't even measure ketones because they're going to be 0.5, they're going to be 0.4, they're going to be barely registering as in ketosis because they're so adapted to the energy demands of their body, whether or not they eat. It has nothing to do with what they eat or when they eat. Their body is ready to make ketones, but not overly produce them. And it becomes a very efficient use of these energy substrates that are otherwise considered precious commodities by a body that, 50,000 years ago could not afford to waste one single calorie doing something stupid.
So Mark, you are the creator of the Primal Blueprint. You created the company Primal Kitchen, which you later sold to Kraft.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you made an allusion there to you're now removed from that company. The products are amazing, by the way. You did an incredible job with the product with the company. You now completely exited the company.
Well, yeah, I mean, I sold to them, but I'm the face of the brand, and I go do all the events, and I just had a company-wide Zoom call today with 50 people on it, and so I'm intimately involved in the R&D and in sort of the sales staff cheerleader, if you will.
You've done an amazing job on
the fun stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the products are truly, truly great. I mean, I don't know if they've changed since being purchased by Kraft, but originally they were amazing. But you mentioned you have a new project that you're working on. I'd love to hear what that is. I
can't tell you. I sort of can, but I'm getting into minimalist footwear, and I've been a fan of that for a long time. So we'll make some announcements in the next few months. But it's been very exciting for me, and
that's awesome.
Looking forward to that.
There's 2 big companies. That one that I wear, and the other one's been trying to get me to steal me away and come over there. But once yours comes out, I'll have to check them out.
I'll talk to you about it offline.
Yeah, very cool. All right, man. Well, I look forward to it. Mark, there's so much we could talk to you about, but I'd love to have you just share where our audience can learn more from you, which book you recommend they pick up first, and where they can be in touch with you.
Sure. So Mark's Daily Apple is my blog.
Great.
Posted there every day since 2006. So that's a lot of words. And my most recent book is 2 Meals a Day, which talks about intermittent fasting, much the way we discussed this concept of metabolic flexibility. But I think for a lot of people who are really interested in the science and the background and the concept of evolution and how humans evolved, and you want to get a baseline understanding of where I'm coming from, my original book, The Primal Blueprint, is still probably the best read to understand how this works and why it works.
How many books have you written? Is it 35?
It's 12, but I've published 30. I published 35 books, but I've written 12.
Okay, yeah, I read somewhere like 35 books. I was like, that's a lot of books. Even 12 is a lot of books. So
12's almost too many, but
are you done with the book writing now? Or you have to?
No, I mean, but now I'm trying to get into some other more politically charged areas than diet and exercise. So we'll see. We'll see what my team lets me do. Are we
allowed to share, or are you going to keep that on your back?
No, I'll keep that in the background. But I'm quite opinionated on where we are in this world right now, and how closely we are to a ridiculous tipping point where nothing makes sense. For instance, the concept of the metaverse right now, and how like we're going to live in the metaverse, that's going to be that's going to enrich our lives. I'm not buying that. So I'm going back to regenerative agriculture, building up an immune system as opposed to getting mass vaccinations. I mean, it all makes it would all make sense in the context of the things I've written about how we evolved as humans. But we have to get back to letting Mother Nature do what Mother Nature does and step aside and go, okay, as long as I understand it, I'm going to play, I'm going to participate, but I can't try to fix it. I can't try to, circumvent it. And that's broadly where I am on that spectrum.
I just invested in a 6,000 acre regenerative agriculture business. And same idea, right? And people have these ideas like, hey, we're going to go do this. And it's going to be an epic failure. And many people are going to die and they're going to be deprived. But there'll be a population of people that exists outside of it that will continue to thrive.
100%. And you are, not to steal your thunder, but you're like the 10th person in our arena that has talked to me about having invested in a regenerative ag farm. So it feels like we're on our way. Feels like we're getting some traction.
Yeah, we just got to keep the kids focused on the right things, not the wrong ones, it seems. I've got a couple of young ones, and they definitely are getting manipulated into going in that direction.
Yeah. And I mean, look, it's like hey, kid, you want some candy? I mean, it's very enticing, some of the things that they're being offered, but you gotta step aside at some point.
Yeah, people say that I'm manipulated, or I say I'm manipulating my kids, and people go, that's like child abuse. It's like, if I'm not doing it, somebody is, right? Like, you got to push them in the direction that you think is in the best interest.
100%.
Mark, thanks for your time, man. Absolutely amazing. Love what you do. Keep it up. And,
appreciate it. Thank you.
Back soon.
All right. Take care. Bye.
That's a wrap, ladies and gents, boys and girls. Thank you very much for joining me on the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. I know you love this conversation with Mark Sisson. If you did, please be sure to share with at least one person you know and love who ultimately wants to look as great, feel as great, perform as well as Mark at 68 years old. I know I do. I've already shared it with my parents. I've already shared it with some very important people in my life, because I think that ultimately there's a lot to be garnered, not just in the words coming out of his mouth, but in the way that he approaches his life, the level-headed demeanor, the calm focus, the seeming absence of fluctuations, right? Mark seems to be very stable. He seems to be very healthy, very fit, very focused, and ultimately very productive. So thank you very much to Mark Sisson. Thank you very much to Primal Blueprint. And thank you one more time to our amazing sponsor for today's show, Ned, high quality CBD derived from hemp, which means it's in the absence of any psychoactive THC, 100% organic, amazingly sourced, an incredible story behind the company as well, which I will share with you in due time. This is a company based out of Southwest Colorado, and literally producing the best quality products that we've been able to find so far. So if you are someone who uses CBD, head over to helloned.com/muscle and get hooked up with 15%. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, do so right now, because we have some more amazing guests coming for you this month and every month going forward. This is Nutrition Month in the Muscle Intelligence community. If you're not already part of our Facebook community, go ahead and join that right now. If you're not already following me on Instagram, go ahead and do that right now. If you're not already subscribed on YouTube, we have amazing content coming on all of those channels and so much more here on the podcast. So, ladies and gents, thank you very much for being here. Live your greatest life in a body that you absolutely love. Ben Pakulski, out.
Thank you so much for tuning into Muscle Intelligence. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to share it with at least one person you know. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.